You're tuned into the It's Real podcast with your hosts, Kayla Kallander and Andrew Yaggie. Each week, we'll talk about what happens behind the scenes working full-time in real estate and share with you real-life stories, our successes and failures as we work to help consumers and industry professionals reach their real estate and real-life goals. Here we go.
Welcome to episode 40 of the It's Real podcast. I'm Kayla Kallander and I'm a mortgage lender.
And I'm Andrew Yaggie and I'm a real estate agent. Episode 40, Kayla. How did we make it here?
I don't know. I just feel like we were like, are we going to do this past 10? Is this going to work? But Here we are. We are persistent and we've had it in us, I guess.
Well, we've definitely beat the odds. I don't know that we always have it in us, but hey, we show up and we get the job done.
It reminds me of that Shania Twain song, like, looks like we made it.
Look how far we've come, my baby.
Oh, of course you know that song. Wait, should we have like a singing episode? We could make it like a musical podcast.
We maybe should. Invite some guests on and just jam.
I love it. And that was totally unplanned. I love it. That's what I love about you, Andrew.
Yep. Hey, like I said, Kayla, we make it work, right?
Make it work. And how's your week been? How's your day been?
Yeah, so it's been good jumping back into work. Speaking of work, kind of escaped to Mexico, kind of the last, just a quick trip, 4 days with my wife and a couple that we're friends with, just to kind of get away, kind of a spring break as there were a few days off of school with my wife being a counselor. So that was really great. It gave me some time, Kayla, to start reading your book.
Oh, good.
You didn't happen to have it sitting by you again, do you? I don't have it. It's still in my bag. That. How funny you should mention that. Yeah. So it was really good. It really gave me, a more of an inside look, and it also makes me wish, Kayla, that I would have embraced LinkedIn a little bit more. I mean, I have an account and I look at it once in a while, but I don't give it much attention. But it's definitely something that, I'm kind of constantly thinking of, hey, how do I hone my craft and how do I get better and what's worth it and what isn't. And so I really appreciated, learning more about your journey among that of, many others in the book.
Thank you. Well, it's funny. I had a client that actually reached out to me the other day, and I had shared this book, and the title chapter is, Hey, It's the LinkedIn Girl. And so it's about how I started on LinkedIn. I just got a purchase agreement today for this client for an investment property in Florida. And we met on LinkedIn years ago. And so I say that because the power of LinkedIn is, what's cool is it is not just people showing their babies and their dogs and what they did every moment. A lot of people do that, and that's excellent for probably Facebook. But what's cool about LinkedIn, it's just a lot more focused on professional. Although there's tons of personal, you just never know who you're going to connect with. So I say dive in more, Andy.
Right. Yeah, I definitely am. I think because I think there's more quality on there than versus something like Facebook or Instagram. And although the algorithm on these platforms, they know exactly what I like to see and what I want to see it, and airplanes and family stuff and whatever. And so it can be a little bit addictive, but I will have to dive in.
It sure can. But yes, let me know how that goes.
I will. Well, Kayla, speaking of diving in, I want to jump a little bit more in because we have a lot to talk about. So for those who maybe missed us last week, we talked a lot about, the current market, the current economy, rates kind of, hanging out in that 6 to 7% region.
Yeah.
And we also talked about the fact that some say real estate is in a recession, referencing, and just to catch everyone up quick, that Gary Keller, who is the founder of Keller Williams Realty, they have their family reunion event. And Gary says basically right now real estate is in a recession because of the Federal Reserve's inflationary policy and how we're going to see a little bit more of a challenging year. And I had hoped that we were going to have some time to maybe share kind of some local market facts just to kind of compare and contrast, because something like this probably is the reality in a larger marketplace, Kayla, but maybe not so much for us.
Right. I agree with that. Well, and I think too, it's even seeing, the difference between where you're at compared to where I'm at, not that far away, but you could see some things might be drastic. Some things might be similar, but think about when you're going from even, California to North Dakota, how those stats could be very different.
immensely different, Kayla, which is really, really interesting. And we'll dive into those stats in just a minute. But I also want to share this article, Kayla. I don't know if you saw it on Inman, and for those of you out there, Inman's just a great news source for real estate agents and lenders that they really, I would say, have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the market. Yeah. And so it talks a little bit about scarce inventory and falling rates could boost home prices. So as they've kind of been looking at and kind of surveying, housing experts, really the gist of the article, Kayla, is that we're going to see some appreciation in home value in 2024. Not a lot, but maybe a little bit more than we saw last year, depending on what area you're in. But yeah, up to 4% appreciation, which really ties into the discussion on homes as a great way to create generational wealth, Kayla.
Well, and the thing is too, is I thought about that article a little bit, and if, let's say, rates don't drastically change, or they do change, like this could mean more buyers in the market, but let's say that rates do fall enough, 0.5%. You got more buyers in the market, but is it enough to move sellers? And so if you have more buyers in the market as well, and not as much inventory, we likely will see prices increase with that competition even itself. And yes, appreciation is great, but it truly just depends on the inventory, I feel, and what's going to be available.
Yeah. And I guess that, to further qualify these articles, like Gary talking about a recession, the thing that I think is important to remember is, a lot of people think recession is like a huge economic crash or meltdown when it could be, something very minor, just, kind of a step in the wrong direction. And and so I think there are challenges out there in certain markets, Kayla, as this article, points out, kind of talking about, sentiment of, the individuals on this housing panel. They were thinking, we'd see a 2.4% appreciation, but now we're looking into the upper threes. And a big part of that is tied to the lack of homes for sale, which kind of dives us in, Kayla, to some of our stats. So I've pulled stats from your market in the Fargo area, and I've also pulled stats from my market in Fergus Falls. And I think it's going to be really, really interesting as we look at this. So let's talk about Fargo first, Kayla. And, we're going to talk kind of a year over year comparison. So, last year at this time, there were 256 active listings in Fargo. Now there are 274. So we've got slightly more inventory. Now, if we look at the listing price, Kayla, the median list price last year, $388,900. And this year it's $370. It's dropped a little bit. Yeah. What do you attribute that to?
I still think that, honestly, I think that whether it's, we do have a lot of new homes here, like we talked about before. If builders can't get homes, off the market, if they've got, it's a new home, but no one's made an offer. It's not built custom from start. I've been seeing a lot of builders trying to get rid of their inventory, so they'll reduce the price. Maybe they'll give, you've seen a lot of the builders give a $10,000, a $20,000 concession, and some people use that to take it off the top, and that reduces the purchase price itself. So when we see that go, whether it's on the NMLS or not, essentially this is showing that those prices are coming down, and I attribute a lot of that to new construction.
Yeah.
How about you? What are your thoughts on Fargo?
It would almost have to be because of new construction, Kayla, because especially when we reference our prior article talking about home appreciation, one would think values have gone up. So it's either, builders giving more seller pays, or builders possibly responding to the call or the need for more reasonably priced houses as well. And maybe, selling more. And I do see a lot up in your area, that are at more attractive price points. But you're right, there's no short of concessions. I get emails from all of the big builders, in the Fargo market, saying not only will we give, huge concessions or upgrades, but even to agents about double a commission that they would normally pay. So that tells me that they're very motivated to move those homes.
And I think too, if clients are just, at the top of their budget and they can't afford that, could a builder say, you know what, we'll come down a little bit? If their debt to income ratio is too high, if rates kind of snuck up a little bit, there could be movement of that purchase price, especially in Fargo with the specials. I mean, builders don't want to hold on to inventory to be paying taxes and specials and let it sit there. So I think there's a big reason it has to do with that.
For sure. Well, going on, Kayla, I'm going to talk about absorption rate here. And so a year ago, that was 1.98 months of homes on the market. And now we're up to 2.56 months. And Kayla, basically what this means is we take the number of homes that have sold in a given month divided by the number of homes available to figure out how many months supply of homes are on the market. So they say a 6-month supply of homes is a balanced market, meaning that it neither favors a buyer nor a seller. If we have less than that, we're in a market that favors the seller. If we have more than 6 months, we're favoring the buyers. And so we're seeing more inventory on the market. And along those same lines, Kayla, we're seeing, a year ago, a home spent an average of 62 days on the market. We're up to 74 roughly. And even jumping and looking at the sold to list ratio. So this looks at the sale to original list price. So a year ago, homes sold at 99% of what they were listed for. So think of this: if you had a home that was listed for 100,000, you're getting 99,000. Jumping ahead, now we're at 96.6, or that same $100,000 house is selling for 96,600. Do you think that's probably the same kind of with some of those concessions, Kayla?
I do. I think that is tied to it as well, is if you're coming down in price to get a house sold, 20 grand. I mean, if someone decides to take that off the top versus get it as a seller paid closing cost, like I said, maybe a client's tight on their debt to income. They need to get that payment down, but they've got the funds for closing costs. That could totally be an attribute for that.
Yeah, no, that would make a lot of sense. And we are just seeing in general, I mean, I feel like there is a little bit of a greater ability to negotiate. Granted, there's still some of those individuals that are sitting out there and they kind of want what they want, but I think the sellers that are selling are a little bit more motivated for one reason or another.
Yeah.
So they're more likely to accept some sort of reduction or concession.
Well, and a seller is selling usually for a reason, whether it's, divorce or moving or upgrading. A buyer doesn't necessarily have to pick your house. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's just more flexibility with clients wanting to buy right now with seller concessions as well.
Kayla, I want to jump over to the Fergus Falls market, which is, where I'm at. And so just really quickly going through the same numbers, the number of listings a year ago was 28. We're kind of in the same realm, 29 listings. And again, it just goes to show just a market that doesn't have much for new construction at all. Absorption rate a year ago was 1.14. We have slightly more inventory at 1.36, but barely. Sold to list ratio, we were at 99.1%. We're kind of in that same realm, even slightly lower at 95.8% of list price, meaning people are getting that $100,000 home for about 95,800. Listing prices a year ago were about 232. And, now we're at about 239. So we've actually seen a little bit of an upward trend. Granted, we have had some higher end homes on the market, and we too are seeing more days on market from 62 to about 74. So a lot of similarities, obviously a much smaller market, where I'm based, but seeing a lot of the same trends.
Well, I think then it kind of tells you that it's not just new construction, but it can just be the market. It can be rates. It's being attributed to many different factors, but you can tell there is a little bit of difference between Fargo and Fergus for sure.
So Kayla, you talked a little bit about, concessions and seller paids. Tell me a little bit more about that. And I'm going to give you a setup, just because, sometimes even as agents, we get working really hard, for our clients and on details, but even, some details fall through the cracks. Not too long ago, I had forgotten that there was a limit, of course, I knew there was a limit, but I had forgotten what the percentage was on a VA loan. And we ended up, accepting an offer that they were asking more than what was allowable. So let's talk about it a little bit more and probably even give me a little bit of a primer as well.
Love to. Well, and this is where, we spoke in the last episode, having a team that aligns. So if I'm talking to a client and they're like, Kayla, I really need these closing costs covered, I don't have enough cash, we need to let the realtor know, hey, when you're negotiating, make sure to ask for seller paid closing costs, where the seller covers the buyer's costs. So just to be clear, you'll hear seller concession, seller paid closing costs. So when we talk about what seller concessions are, depending on the program and the loan amount, or your LTV, loan to value, how much you put down, that determines how much a seller can contribute. So for example, let's take a conventional 5% down loan. The max contribution you can get from the seller is 3%. Now that's off of the purchase price. Oh, look at you. You've got this lovely graphic.
Just your quick notes. I wouldn't say it's a lovely graphic, but it's a quick Microsoft Word.
I love it. Thank you for your help. So when you think, okay, and I just said less than 10% down, so 3%. Now let's just think about that same scenario with FHA. Let's just say you're going between the two. If you're looking at FHA, you can get up to 6% seller paid closing costs. Again, it's off the purchase price, not the loan amount. So when you think of the, should I go conventional or FHA? This is just one great part about FHA that your lender should be telling you about. Now, with conventional, if you put a little more down, you can get up to 6%, but it all depends on how much you're putting down for conventional. So you'll see less than 10% is 3%. 10 to 25% down, you can get a seller contribution of 6%. And then if you're putting down 25% or more, then you're getting to that higher limit of 9%. We don't often see that because usually those are more investment properties, not always, but we usually see that. And like you have here, it's tapped out, and usually it's at 2%. If you're looking at USDA, do you do a lot of USDA loans, Andy?
We do, I would say conventional for the most part, and then kind of not quite a three-way tie, but close between FHA, USDA, and VA, although probably less VA loans. And the VA loan is where we ran into that issue where it's like, okay, let's take 5%, and no, you can only do 4%, and that's something that, again, it's hard to remember all of the intricacies sometimes, when you're working, through all of the details and in the heat of the battle.
Well, and as you saw, VA only allows for 4%. I have a client right now. She's buying a home. She wanted to know how much money is that. So we let her know. And we realized, Andy, that she was going to have less closing costs than what she would be getting. She's like, well, my closing costs, I'm just using numbers here, are $5,000, but 4% is $6,000. What do I do? And so at that point, especially in Fargo, we can look to pay down specials. In any other areas, we can look to get a more expensive insurance policy. You can get owner's title insurance. There are so many things you can do. Buy down the interest rate with that excess. So do not leave money on the table. The lender should be looking at final numbers and saying, oh gosh, okay, we've got $1,400 extra that we didn't know about. Appraisal came in cheaper. Home insurance that they chose was way cheaper because they're a veteran. We've got $1,400 here. What are we going to do with that? We're not just going to leave it on the table. We're going to go to the client and the realtor and say, hey, do you want a lower interest rate? We can buy it down. Do you want to pay off specials? Like I just said, all those things. It is a great resource if you can get those. And like we talked about, in almost every transaction, I'm seeing seller paid closing costs. So,
and that's so good to know, Kayla, because no one's ever phrased it or put it to me like that. And I know, you take good care of your clients. I have, a few lenders that I'll work with as well that I know they do a great job, but usually those discussions are between the client and the lender. Like I'm not often brought in, but I know that I'm going to watch out a little bit more, going forward, just knowing because again, a lot of my teaching is like, well, they're asking for 6%, but they probably won't need that much. And well, okay, but they potentially could, like you say, buy down the rate or something like that. And so it's like, hey, we've negotiated that, so let's take full advantage of that if I'm working with you as a buyer. And my perception is that a lot of lenders really don't do that. They're like, well, these are kind of the figures, and yep, I guess you're not going to get all 6% of that, but your costs are going to be covered, and most people are going to be content. But like with so many things in life, we don't know what we don't know.
You're right. It's exactly right. And I had a client that had a $20,000 seller concession, $20,000. Wow. And we found ways to use it all because you want a lower rate? Sure. You want to include some things on your insurance policy? Let's do it because it's the seller concession can cover those things. And maybe that's an episode that we should do in the future is what all is included in closing costs and what are prepaids. and, prepaids or taxes and insurance, things like that for your escrow. But that is also a closing cost. So it's just educating the buyer and letting them know their options with those concessions.
So what I'm hearing is if you give Kayla 20 grand to go shopping for her clients, she's not leaving any money on the table.
I will use every penny. I will shop till I drop.
I love it.
Yeah, but hopefully that gives some clarity if people have heard, what this means and what you should ask for. It's depending on the program, I know some people that are like, well, I really want to go conventional, but I'm like, well, the rate's higher, your mortgage insurance is higher, and you're getting less seller concessions. But for someone else, it might make sense to go conventional. But with FHA, gosh, if you can get 6% and you're short on cash, perfect solution for a first-time home buyer that has a limited amount of funds in their bank account. So
I like it.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of seller concessions in Fergus?
Yeah, we're seeing more and more, of course, in the last several years. There haven't been as many if you want to be competitive and want to get your offer accepted. But yeah, it's becoming more the norm. And again, that's where buyers and sellers sometimes are on two different pages, where as agents or even lenders. And again, as those of us who really do work a lot actively in the business versus some that are just working part-time, we have a really good grasp of what's going on because we work with a lot of buyers and also work with a lot of sellers. But yeah, for sure. And so it's just, again, helping people reach their goals and providing good counsel. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of it.
I always say prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. So knowing exactly what your client, they're putting all the puzzle pieces together. I mean, to be a counsel, like you said, you need those seasoned lenders and realtors that know exactly these things. Otherwise, you're leaving money on the table. You're leaving a higher interest rate locked in when you could have a lower one. So that just goes back to kind of our last episode of make sure you're working with seasoned people too, because these things are so important, especially now in this market.
Absolutely. Well, Kayla, I don't know that we hit every single bullet point on the list, but I think you did a pretty good job of explaining seller paid concessions. And honestly, like I had a lot. I mean, I learned a lot, in this episode, just sitting here and you educating me. So I really appreciate that. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Use a seasoned realtor and use a seasoned lender. That's all I have to say. I see it so often sometimes happen, or I get clients that, didn't have a great experience, and you as the consumer deserve the best. So I'll leave it at that.
I love it, Kayla. Well, hey, great connecting as usual. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you back here next week.
Sounds good. See you then.
See ya.